This morning we looked at the work that is involved in training our children to serve, and that maybe is the most obvious challenge at times. In every society, you have to focus on the things of yourself and your family, and so there are a variety of challenges for young and old to prepare and to be willing to serve. But tonight I want to think about the importance of training our children to be served. And again, that might seem like something, well, our children are going to instinctively do that. They'll be glad for anyone to serve them. And that's true. But there are lots of things that our children automatically do in some way, but we have to help shape and refine how they do it. And so our children, they're born, God has created children. They're going to learn to speak if they're around people who speak. But we have to help shape and refine their speech in some ways, and they can learn to write. But as they learn to write, you help them to make that S curve a little bit smoother and help to smooth out those rough edges. And so that's the approach that I mean. While our children will independently, willingly accept service, there's still training that they need in accepting opportunities that others offer for them to be served, just as we need that kind of training from God as well. Do we really, though, have to learn to be served? In Proverbs chapter 30, I referenced this morning. Notice in verse 15, Solomon says, "The leech has two daughters, give and give." And what he means by that is explained at the end. There are three things that are never satisfied, four that never say enough. And so that, I think, is kind of the lead into that the leech is never satisfied. And so he has two daughters who are never satisfied, give and give. And so while of course children are born dependent by God's design, if they are not trained in how to receive the service that others offer, then they become the daughters of the leech. They become too dependent. By God's design, of course, children are to be taught, and there are a host of things that we might think, well, that's just almost understood and instinctive, but really it isn't. And maybe our parents didn't tell us some certain things. Maybe we learned it while watching them and learned it from others. But Proverbs chapter 1, verses 8 and 9 is a reminder that children, God intended for them to be ignorant of many things so that they would have to depend on someone to learn from. And so, my son, hear the instruction of a father, and do not forsake the law of your mother, for they will be a graceful ornament on your head and chains about your neck. If we will train ourselves first and then our children in how to receive the service that others offer, it'll be like a beautiful necklace, like a beautiful crown, ornament on their head. That's what God intends for them to learn from us. And of course, if we just take the approach, well, they'll figure that out. Then what will happen? What happens when there are children who have not been trained in how to receive what they have? They just receive. Well, then, of course, we've seen children like that, and at times wondered if we are going to untrain our children when they show those things, when they expect what they want, and when they expect more, and they expect more, and it's never enough. When they expect others to do what they themselves are able to do, then these are signals that they have learned how to be served but have not been trained how to be served. And so what's the problem when that happens, when there are these signs and these signals? Well, it may be, back to Proverbs chapter 1, it may be that the parents have failed to properly instruct, and it may be that children are still in that process of absorbing and learning and putting those things into practice. And then at some point in time, it may be that the children just refuse to hear. But yes, it is certain that we have to learn to be served just as much as we have to learn to serve. And children need that lesson. Now, this is a lesson that definitely requires wisdom. Turn to Proverbs chapter 19. Proverbs 19. Would you give your adolescent child $1 million and just give them the choice, anytime, any place, anywhere? They can spend that freely as long as it isn't something sinful. Well, I think you could sort that out pretty quick. That would not be in their best interest. Oh, they'd love it, and they'd like you for some amount of time, but that would not be good for them. In fact, adults who instantly win that much money, there have been all kinds of studies and interviews that literally people's lives have been ruined when they instantly get a significant influx of cash, because Proverbs chapter 19 and verse 10, luxury is not fitting for a fool. Now, a fool can be someone who's rebellious. It's often used that way in the book of Proverbs. But a fool can also be someone who is just inexperienced. And so think about that perspective. Luxury, exorbitant wealth is not for someone who isn't trained, who isn't taught, who isn't prepared in how to use those kinds of resources. And again, this isn't only true of money. This is true of anything. Anything that you have a lot of, well, the more that you have, well, then your wisdom has to keep up with the pace. If you had a lot of children, well, then you need wisdom to keep up with the pace. If you have a lot of skill and a lot of ability, there's some really talented people. You've seen them before, but they don't have the wisdom of how to use it. If you have a lot of talent, then you need wisdom to accompany that. If you have a lot of leisure time, a lot of extra spare time, then you need wisdom in how to use that. So this principle applies to all of that. And when children receive many more things beyond just food and clothing, doesn't mean that's wrong. It doesn't even have to be bad for them. It just means when they have more than they need, when they have more than they have earned, then they need a father, they need a mother to help them gain the wisdom that they need. Turn to Deuteronomy chapter 6. Parents, of course, if they're going to teach, they can only teach things that they themselves have learned. And so this lesson of being trained to serve is one in some ways that parents are often still learning. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, here God is teaching the adults. As Moses is going to die, he's addressing the people before his death and before they enter in. And so this warning is given. Deuteronomy 6, verses 10 through 12. So it shall be, when the Lord your God brings you into the land of which he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give you large and beautiful cities which you did not build, houses full of all good things which you did not fill, hewn out wells which you did not dig, vineyards and olive trees which you did not plant, when you have eaten and are full, beware, lest you forget the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage. Now, the generation that this was spoken to would be Joshua's generation. And so how well did they listen? Well, go over to the book of Judges. You might remember Judges chapter 2, or maybe more so, verse 10. Judges chapter 2, verse 7 says, the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, who had seen all the great works of the Lord which he had done for Israel. So that's the generation that was being spoken to in Deuteronomy chapter 6. They heard those things. They took those warnings. They went in, captured the land. I wouldn't necessarily say that they earned it, because they took it from those who were there with God's instruction. But as Moses told them, you're instantly going to have all these things. When you do, beware. So it appears that generation remembered the Lord with that wealth. But verse 10 is probably more well-known, and maybe one of the most well-known verses in the book of Judges. But after that first generation, then there arose a generation that did not know the Lord. So why did they not know the Lord? There's at least two possibilities. It could be that older generation didn't teach them. Could be. Or was it that the new land, the new houses, the new wells, the new walls, all those things that were warned of in the book of Deuteronomy, they became so fixated on those things that they did not know the Lord who brought them out of Egypt. As parents, we have to learn. One generation did not learn. But if we're going to teach our children how to be served, Israel did not learn how to be served by God. God was serving them when they were brought into the land, and they didn't learn how to receive what He was offering. Go over to the New Testament, 1 Timothy chapter 6. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 6 through 10. This would go alongside Deuteronomy chapter 6. Now godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. And having food and clothing, with these we shall be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and harmful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness, and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. Of course, this is not just a warning to the rich. Every society has this challenge, and every social class has this challenge, and every family has this challenge in their own unique ways. But even those who are the head of the family, they don't make the decision ultimately for the hearts of every member. Every individual member of the family has to make a choice in regards to what is said here. Godliness with contentment, viewing that as great gain, or a lack of contentment, and so searching for and spending life looking for some other form of gain. With godliness and contentment, then I can be served by others, and it does not have a spoiling effect. But if my desires grow, then my contentment is not growing, and then I'm even destroyed by the ways that I'm offered, or by the ways that I'm served. And so the more as parents that we read 1 Timothy 6 and recognize weaknesses, well, the weaker I am in that, then the weaker I am as a teacher towards my children. And it doesn't mean I'm a failure. It just means I've got to grow. My children depend upon that. And the more that I have learned the lessons that Paul writes here, then the better equipped I am to train others in godliness with contentment. And so we have to learn that lesson, parents, so that we are equipped to help our children. But the focus in this lesson is on our children. We have to teach our children. Teaching them how to be served, turn to John chapter 13, means teaching them how much there is to learn when we are served. There are a host of lessons available to us that are sitting right there, waiting to be used every time that we are served in some way. In John chapter 13, this is that familiar occasion where Jesus, at the last meal before his betrayal, he takes a towel, dresses himself as a servant, and washes the feet of the disciples. So I'm just jumping into the middle of that. Verse 12, so when he had washed their feet, taken his garments, and sat down again, he said to them, do you know what I have done to you? Now, how would a young child answer that question? They would say, you washed our feet. But that's not Jesus' point. His point is, there's a lot that I've just taught you. Stop and think about, you've just been served. Do you understand the lessons that are now available for you? And of course, one of them on that occasion was, I'm the Lord, and if I washed your feet, well, then you should wash the feet of one another, humbly serve one another, because you all are equals. Children are not able often, at varying stages in their development, when they are served, they can't grasp, well, I was served because of the deep, genuine love of the one who served me. Sometimes all they see is that they were served and they received something. So as parents, we have to help them recognize, well, here's what happened that got us here. Someone genuinely cares for us. And in order for that to happen, someone had to have the idea to serve us. Someone had to neglect one thing in order to do this. Children don't realize that. They're just looking at what was done or what was brought. But something had to be neglected in order for this to get here. Our job as parents is to help them realize that. Now, they don't know the cost of what was provided. They don't have a concept of that because they haven't done whatever was involved in that. Someone has to help them see that. They can't think about the others who could have been served, but we were served. Why is that? They can't grasp all those things. And so as parents, it's our job to be like Jesus in that sense and say, do you know what maybe I've done for you? Do you know what others have just done for us? And help them to learn. Jesus was training, and that's, of course, the job of a parent. Go to Psalm 136. Job of the parents, is to teach gratitude. But as I was working this lesson, I thought for a minute, how do you teach gratitude? That's an inner response. How do you teach gratitude? I don't know that I have the perfect answer, but Psalm 136 is a psalm of repetitive praise, focused more so on thanksgiving. It's a psalm of thanksgiving, but I want you to think about it as God's plan to train Israel in gratitude. Maybe this was written by David or whomever it was written by, but the Psalms, it was God's choice in regards to what was recorded and what was preserved. Why did God preserve this record of a psalm of thanksgiving? I think it's in part to train Israel in gratitude. They would sing this song on some occasions, and it was training the parents and the children in gratitude. Let's look at this psalm. I'm not going to read much of it, but think about how this psalm would train Israel in gratitude and teach us at least some of the principles of how we get this concept and this practice, at least offer it to the hearts of our children. How do you teach gratitude? First of all, you have to notice that you're being served. And again, as parents, hopefully we do. As children, sometimes they do not. And so it's the parent's job to call attention to the fact someone has served or is serving you. And this whole psalm is an emphasis of that. Beginning with verse 4, it just repeats, here are the things that God has done for us, calling Israel's attention to the vast occasions when God has served them. Second, you train others in gratitude by helping them to consider why they were served. Why did God serve Israel? Was it because Israel was this vastly more holy nation than any other nation? God didn't serve them because of who they were. Why did God serve them? Well, verse 1, give thanks to the Lord, not because we are good. Give thanks to the Lord, for He is good. And that's what children have to learn. Someone served you not because you're the pinnacle child, the standard of who a child ought to be. You were served because of what is in others, not necessarily in you, because of who they are, not because of who I am. God called Israel's attention to that. And then in verse 23, God also called their attention to what had to happen in order for them to be served. What did God do so that He did serve them? Verse 23, so all of these are echoing. Give thanks to the Lord, verse 23, who remembered us in our lowly state. Children have to know somebody served us because they thought of us. They saw some need. They saw our lowly condition in whatever way it was. And so they considered us. God called Israel's attention to that. You could go through this whole psalm. God also helped them to realize, well, what would happen if God didn't serve them? Where would Israel be if God never served them? I guess you could say there never would have been in Israel, but they were there in bondage in Egypt, and they would never have gone out if God had not served them. And this whole psalm goes, in summary fashion, goes through a portion of their history. So that's how we teach gratitude. We help our children to realize what would have happened if we had not been served, and then to offer a response that is appropriate. And at the end of this psalm, as at the beginning, the lesson that God was training Israel in, here's the response to a God who considered you and who served you. Give thanks to the God of heaven, for his mercy endures forever. These are some of the ways that we teach gratitude, and gratitude is the antidote to entitlement or being spoiled, but it has to be taught and it has to be seen, and then it has to be expressed. Parents have to teach children all the ins and outs of gratitude. Children have to be taught not to expect to be served. Turn to Luke chapter 17. And there's a fine line here. Well, if I know I have some need, then is somebody going to help me? There's a difference, though, isn't there, in viewing being served or accepting that service and expecting that service. Jesus says this, Luke 17, verses 7 through 9. And which of you, having a servant, plowing or tending sheep, will say to him when he has come in from the field, "Come at once and sit down to eat"? But will he not rather say to him, "Prepare something for my supper, and gird yourself, and serve me till I have eaten and drunk, and afterward you will eat and drink"? Does he thank that servant because he did the things which were commanded him? I think not. So a master expects to be served, and a master can show some gratitude to those he serves them, but he doesn't have to because he is a master. But we aren't training masters. We aren't masters ourselves. We're servants. We're training our children to be servants, so we don't get to act like the master. We don't get to expect what we are given. And a part of the challenge is when we are served, and when we are served repeatedly, as children are, then it's easy for them to lose the benefit that God intends for them to have, the benefit, as we noticed this morning, of gratitude in the opportunity to serve. But God also intended, of course, there would be gratitude when we are served. But we don't have that gratitude when we expect it. And if we forget that from time to time in our home toward our husband or a wife, if we forget to express gratitude, then so will our children. Then James chapter 1 and verse 17, our children also have to be trained and reminded that every good gift comes from the Father. Those are the words of James. James chapter 1 verse 17, every good gift and every perfect gift is from above and comes down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow of turning. Train our children to see how God is involved in every gift of every day, from the routine and simple even to the most special. We read earlier from Deuteronomy chapter 6. I want to go back and read a couple of familiar verses there. Deuteronomy 6 verses 6 and 7. You remember Ephesians 6 verse 4, bring your children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Well, Deuteronomy 6 and 7, if you like to take notes in your Bible, these two go together well. Deuteronomy 6 is a little bit more expanded, but teaching Israel under the law of Moses to bring their children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. But here's how it was worded on that occasion. Deuteronomy 6 and verse 6, and these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. That's important. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise up. You get the point, when you're going out and when you're coming in and when you're staying and when you're going and everything that happens in between. He says, be constantly teaching your children. And so throughout the day, when you're in your home, There is some gift, some blessing there. Include God verbally in that. When you go out, there's going to be some blessing, and sometimes it's even what didn't happen to us. And attribute, give that credit and that honor to God. We can hardly overdo that. And then 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 18 says, "In all things give thanks." As we come and as we go, if we will in all things give thanks, then we'll be training our children to be served. How to be served. Pay attention to the fact that they are served, and then to express gratitude from God on an ongoing basis. Well, as we train, as we teach, as we lead, there's of course the great unknown for a parent, and that is, what are they going to do with what I offer them? Whether it's the things we studied this morning, what are they going to do with what I teach them about serving? What are they going to do with what I teach them about being served? Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 6 has something to say about that. Proverbs 22 and verse 6 says, "Train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." Now remember that Proverbs are typically brief summaries, general statements, not intended to deal with every possible outcome and circumstance. And so just as a side note, in Proverbs 12 and verse 21, it says, "No grave trouble will overtake the righteous, but the wicked shall be filled with evil." Oh, so nothing bad can happen to the righteous? Well, that's not the point of that proverb. It is a general statement of that kind. And Proverbs 10:27 is like that. And so is like Proverbs 22 and verse 6. Proverbs 22 verse 6 is not a guarantee. If you show and tell your children all that is right, then it is 100% guaranteed and certain they will serve God all the days of their life. Adam and Eve had the best father, and they forsook the training that God offered them. Israel had the best king, and the majority of every generation, or at least most of them, forsook the training that God offered. And so as parents, that may happen to us. But that possibility aside, if you will put these things into the hearts of your children for however many number of years that you are their primary leader and influence, if you'll put those things in their heart, what can your children do to undo what you've put there? That's part of how the nature of the memory God has given us. We can't unremember things. If we'll put these things in their heart, they can't forget them. They can reject them. They can ignore them and not do them and try not to think about them. But there will be times they will remember what you did with them, or what they saw you do as a father and a mother. And they may go far, far from it, and they may live their life trying to do the opposite of what they saw you do. But even in that, in their rebellion, what they're doing is remembering what they heard and saw. They're remembering it. They haven't forgotten it. And so this is the best that we can do. Put these things in them. Plant them, and then water them, and they will have the way in them, and you can have the satisfaction of knowing that. And if they do not use it, you can know that you offered. But if they use it, John said in 3 John, I think verse 2, "I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth." As parents, whatever phase of life your children are at, you can grasp that. Or if you have no children, maybe you can grasp that to some degree with your parents. No greater joy. It doesn't matter how successful a career you build, no matter how successful you are in any other part. If you walk in the truth, that's the greatest gift you could give to your parents. Or as a parent, that's the greatest gift that you could imagine, is to know that your children walk in truth. And if, as a parent, you get to see your children walk in truth, then for you and for them, as we sing, it will be sweeter as the years go by. And with these things, as heaven is nearer, then the way grows clearer. by learning to serve and learning to be served. And so let our determination be to train them up in the way that they should go. And then they have to choose, and then we have to choose who we will serve, and then also who will we allow to serve us. Again, Jesus invested his time on earth in all men in some ways, but especially in 12 men. And out of those 12, we know the way that Judas responded to him. Judas refused the training that God offered, and Judas refused to be served by Jesus. He rejected the service that Jesus offered. And so if you face the day that your children reject what you've offered them, then Jesus understands. Because just as children decide who they will love the most, so also parents have to decide who will I love the most and whose service will I accept. If my children will not serve the Lord, then Jesus offers to serve us, comfort us. Will I accept what He offers? What will our children do with what we train them in? I don't know. But 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 17 says, pray without ceasing. As parents, that's the only guarantee, is that you can pray, ceaselessly pray for your children, that they would learn to be servants and that they would learn to accept the service that God offers to them. So, of course, there are parts of being served that are easy, but there are other parts that we will fail at if we don't have God's help. We truly do not know how to be served in a way that is good for us and in a way that pleases God without God's help. And so if we find ourselves on the learning end of that, if we are still learning from God how to be served, then so much more our children need someone to teach them how to be served. Let's offer them the best that we have, and let's pray for God's help to teach our children to serve and to be served. Take out your songbooks, turn to number 320. Every invitation song is simply, in part, a reminder to us that God has already offered to serve us and is offering to serve us in every way that we need. If you're here tonight and in your heart and soul and mind, you know there is sin and you know there is no escape without the blessings that Jesus came to bring. We sing this song to remind you of that. And whether your need is to confess your faith and to leave that sin and to be baptized, we're happy to serve you. If as a Christian we can encourage you in some way publicly or later and privately, we offer our time and want you to know that. But each one of us, if we are faithful for today, then we need God's help to do so tomorrow, and the song will prepare and equip us for tomorrow. But if we can serve you tonight, help you in any way tonight, come forward and tell us how as we stand together, as we sing to our God.